Under a stormy night sky, armored knights pushed through the woods. A holy knight confronted a vampire, mocking him for hiding for half a year. He accused the vampire of many murders and of mocking his order. The knight declared that the vampire's time was over, stabbing him while boasting this act would earn him the title of Vampire Slayer. He listed the vampire's sins, claiming his broken appearance was proof enough. The knight then revealed a smirk, admitting they had delayed the capture on purpose. He explained they needed to make a big show of it, because a real-life vampire hunt was great for church PR and a warning to non-believers. The vampire knew this world was for the strong, which was why he had always run. As the sword split him in two, he wondered if it was all for nothing. The knight declared his very existence a stain on the church. With his last thought, the vampire wished for one more chance. He woke with a gasp, breathing heavily in a crude shelter. He clutched his throat, confused about what had just happened. He checked his body, finding a hole despite the clear memory of being killed. It wasn't a dream. This was the tent he lived in before the knights began their hunt. The tally marks on the wall confirmed it was 6 months ago. He had returned to the past. Clenching his fist, he realized this was his second chance. He was in a remote forest near Broadwin Village, the place where the weak vampire named Eugene had hidden for years. One mistake had ruined everything, leading to a relentless pursuit by mercenaries and knights. For 12 years, fear had confined him to drinking only the blood of beasts. He couldn't make the same mistakes again. Hiding would only lead to the same end. He needed to become strong enough to survive their hunt. He decided to change his strategy and embrace the vampire way. Vampires absorb power for blood, and he knew where to find a strong source. The master of the forest erupted from a swamp. Eugene dodged the beast's powerful attacks, narrowly avoiding the projectiles it spat. His weak body could only evade for so long, but if he could draw blood, he could win. His old survival strategy was based on stealth. Now, knowing that would fail, he attacked without hesitation, stabbing his sword into the creature. His sword shattered against its hide. The beast's tail sent him flying, crashing into the muck. He lay wounded, realizing he had underestimated his opponent as it loomed over him. This was a roamer, a wild predator of the wilderness, some of which carried mana crystals. That crystal was the key, but the power difference was overwhelming. He had been too reckless. A beast of this level could kill him instantly. The roamer dragged him underwater into the dark depths. He thought maybe he'd been arrogant, assuming second chances were like a BOGO sale. But that wasn't it. He had never overestimated himself. His life had been spent crawling, doing anything to survive. Now he chose to fight to truly live. He had to fight and win, because there would be no third chance if he lost this one. There is no next time after defeat. He reached into the beast's maw to seize his prize, the key to his survival. Survival was always built on the blood of others. The mana crystal shattered, and after a moment of silence under the moon, a massive explosion of power erupted from the swamp. He had promised himself he would fight if given another chance. Now, standing transformed amid the carnage, he would seize both blood and victory. Under the full moon, Eugene stood transformed in the now quiet swamp. He had only needed the roamer's blood, but absorbing its large, uniquely colored mana crystal was a massive bonus. The crystal granted him the ability to cover his skin in black scales, which might even let him move about in the daylight. He recalled first learning of the beast from mercenaries who were attacked when monsoons widened the swamp. In the chaos of that forgotten battle, he had managed to drink some of the injured roamer's blood, gaining enough power to dispatch several mercenaries and escape. He now had more power, but it still wasn't enough to face Holy Knight Young Dirt. The knight had an uncanny ability to find him, so hiding was no longer an option. He had to gather enough strength to fight back. With the sun about to rise, he knew it was time to leave. A voice chuckled, pleased that the fake master who had turned a beautiful lake into a swamp was finally dead. The voice thanked Eugene, but declared he must now pay the price for staining the grounds with blood. Eugene turned, startled by the sudden appearance of a new presence. A winged creature of pure water introduced herself as Miriam, the guardian of the lake and the true master of this territory. She furiously cursed him for enraging the forest and the earth. She then paused, realizing he hadn't reacted to her big speech, and mockingly asked if the bald vampire could even hear her, as sensing spirits was a rare skill. Eugene remained unimpressed. He simply asked who she was. Shocked that he could see and hear her, she hesitantly asked if he had heard what she said. He confirmed he had, specifically the part where she called him a bald vampire. Miriam formally introduced herself as a water spirit, explaining the roamer had usurped her territory 15 years ago and made her slave. Or rather, a strategic partner, she quickly corrected, since her water purification skills were useful for attracting prey. She was grateful he'd killed the crocodile and purified the land. She mused at how meticulous his disguise as a bald old man must have been, just to lower the beast's guard. As she chattered, Eugene noticed one of the glowing tattoos on his chest was fading. Miriam complimented his marvelous tattoos, asking what they meant. He admitted he didn't know. He'd always had them. He explained that he was simply born a vampire, with his earliest memory being the 10 tattoos on his body. He had been so focused on a quiet life of survival that he never had time for self-reflection. If the tattoos were seals, he reasoned, then his power-up must have released one. He announced his departure, telling her to protect the forest. Miriam begged him to stay, complaining that it had been ages since she had someone to talk to. To entice him, she offered him some clean water, claiming her gamer girl, water fairy bath water, was amazing. She promised it would improve his pale complexion. As she theatrically produced a stream of water from her mouth, he bluntly told her to get lost. He walked away as she desperately offered to purify any water for him, even offering to pee it out if he preferred that over vomit. Several days later, in Broadwind Village, a man burst in to tell the village chief that the red-eyed monster had appeared. The villagers gathered to find a large pile of hunted animals, far more than usual. The chief was puzzled. The monster usually brought animals once a fortnight, and it wasn't time yet. The red-eyed monster was a mysterious figure who had lived near the village for 10 years. He had never been a threat, only appearing late at night to leave dead animals. Now, he stood at the edge of the village, asking for permission to enter. The chief, though wary, agreed. When the monster first appeared, everyone was afraid, but since his animal drops were a form of tax payment, they had learned to coexist. Their strange relationship had lasted a decade. The chief nervously asked if he had something to say. Eugene explained that after a long isolation, his sickness was finally healed, and he wanted to share the good news. He felt he owed the village a great debt and wished to return the favor. The villagers looked on, confused. Removing his hood, Eugene revealed a handsome face and offered his help should they ever need it. The crowd gasped in shock. They couldn't believe the masked monster was a noble-looking half-elf. The chief was stunned. He had always worn a mask, but who knew he was this good-looking underneath? Later, Miriam followed Eugene, questioning why he gave away all the animals he hunted. She insisted a vampire should crave only death, but he explained that in the human world, showing one's face was a symbol of good faith. Miriam argued that he shouldn't get involved since he planned to leave soon. Eugene corrected her. He had thought this village was insignificant, but he was wrong and could no longer be a spectator. He revealed that mercenaries would soon raid the village and kill everyone. In his past life, mercenaries had come to kidnap a boy for the region's lord, Sir Terwin. To eliminate witnesses, they slaughtered all the villagers. If he didn't prevent that massacre, the Holy Knights would eventually swarm his home again. Miriam found it hard to believe, but couldn't read his intentions. He told her she would find out soon enough. For now, he needed to gain the villagers' trust so he could act without raising suspicion. He flicked the annoying fairy away, sending her tumbling. She complained, then noticed he had stopped dead in his tracks. Ahead of them, a group of armed mercenaries emerged from the trees. The men spotted him, noting his strange hair and assuming he was a local. Their leader decided he was too pretty to be a threat. Seeing he was alone and unarmed, they decided to kill him before he could scream and ruin their ambush. One charged forward, swinging a large axe. Miriam cried out. As the axe swung down, Eugene's eyes glowed a deep red. In a flash, he was behind the mercenary, who collapsed in a spray of blood. He turned to the stunned Miriam, explaining that he needed the villagers' trust so they wouldn't find it suspicious when he killed all of these mercenaries. He explained to Miriam that one must build trust with others to avoid seeming suspicious when one plans to kill a group of mercenaries. The mercenaries screamed in terror, realizing he was not human. One of them, however, saw an opportunity, rallying the others by reminding them of the huge reward the church would pay for a live vampire. His bravado was short-lived as Eugene blocked his sword with a scaled hand and killed him instantly. Another mercenary met the same fate. The leader realized this was no ordinary vampire and ordered his men to at least secure the corpse. Another man, eager for the prize, charged in foolishly and was cut down just as quickly. A hulking mercenary swung a spiked mace, only for Eugene to catch it with his bare hands. The man stared in disbelief as Eugene noted the sun was setting. With a crunch, he crushed the weapon's handle and killed the man with a single, brutal punch, sending his body flying. As darkness fell, Eugene stood amongst the carnage, declaring that nighttime was his time. The remaining mercenaries, finally understanding the futility of single combat, decided to attack all at once. Just then, the villagers arrived with torches, horrified by the gruesome scene before them. The chief, catching his breath, asked if the red-eyed monster was responsible for this massacre. Eugene calmly lied, claiming he had found them this way while checking his hunting traps. He explained that the mercenaries were the culprits, likely ambushed on their way to the village. He then revealed a pile of slain black wolves, adding them to his fabricated story. He claimed he had chased the wolves off as they fed on the bodies, warning that survivors might still be lurking. The chief, though suspicious, questioned how he could have killed so many of the infamous beasts alone. His doubts were erased when villagers found wolf claw marks on the corpses, a detail confirmed by others. The chief apologized for his suspicion. After they decided to bury the bodies, Miriam privately scoffed at Eugene's ever-growing mountain of lies. She knew the truth. He had killed the men first, then the wolves that arrived after, using their bodies to fake the evidence. She wondered why he cared so much about his image instead of just leaving. He clearly had a plan. Eugene then presented the chief with a blood-stained letter he had supposedly taken from corpse. The chief was stunned to see the seal of the local lord, Sir Terwin, his eyes widening in shock at its contents. He frantically called for a young man named Felid, announcing that the letter revealed Felid was Sir Terwin's bastard son. The villagers were astounded. The mercenaries had been there for the boy. The mercenary leader had been terrified, unable to comprehend the speed of the slaughter. He watched as his men were cut down with terrifying efficiency. He knew returning empty-handed meant death, so he urged his men to fight together. Even a monster has limits, he reasoned, but he was paralyzed by fear. Eugene continued his bloody work, his crimson eyes fixed on his next target. He dispatched another man, sending him crashing into a tree, and then another, until only the leader remained on the blood-soaked ground. The lone survivor asked why he had been targeted, pleading that they were just doing a job. Eugene loomed over him, demanding to know what that job was, his voice cold as he declared the village was his. The man babbled an apology, insisting they weren't there to hunt a vampire, but to find the missing bastard son of the Terwin family. Eugene called him a liar, stating the mission was too simple to require such a large force. He asked if their true plan was to wipe out the village. The leader confessed they were hired not by the patriarch, but by his relatives, Kamara and Vertel Terwin, to kidnap the boy amidst some noble drama. They brought extra men just in case. Eugene's face hardened at the name Vertel Terwin, the commander of the vampire hunter squad that had hunted him in his past life. He reasoned a knight like Vertel wouldn't have ordered a massacre. That was the mercenaries' own doing. Yet, it was the village's disappearance that had triggered the large-scale search that ultimately led the paladins to him. The leader swore he would never have attacked if he knew Eugene was there. Eugene simply told him to watch out for wolves on his way back and turned away. The man, shocked at being spared, began to thank him for his mercy, only to be impaled. Miriam questioned the act, but Eugene stated he couldn't let a man who knew his true nature live. Besides, the real wolves were already here, drawn by the smell of blood. Back with the villagers, the chief confirmed the mercenaries were guards sent to escort Felid. The people worried about what to do now that the escort was dead. Eugene offered to take the boy to the lord's castle himself, confident in his ability to navigate the dangerous woods. The chief was hesitant to accept such a dangerous offer, but Eugene insisted, claiming a knight would never decline a chance to help. Miriam thought his shamelessness was thicker than steel. The fairy and the villagers stared in stunned silence. Miriam was dumbfounded. With a faint smile, Eugene offered a late introduction, declaring himself Jan Eugene of the House of Eugene. Miriam could only think, yeah, right? And I'm a tooth fairy. The villagers were baffled by Eugene's claim of knighthood, and Miriam was equally flabbergasted. He smoothly apologized for the late introduction and grandly announced himself as Jan Eugene of the Eugene family. The crowd buzzed with gossip, some chastising others for their rudeness, and insisting he now be called Sir Eugene. Miriam hissed that he was taking the lie too far, but Eugene calmly pointed out that these simple folk had never seen a noble before. The village was in an uproar, completely captivated by the tale of the boy in the mountains being a secret noble. They had no way to verify his claims. The villagers crowded around him, asking why a knight would live in seclusion for over a decade. He gave a vague answer about cutting ties with the world, which they readily accepted, attributing his survival skills to his knightly training. The chief lamented their poverty, saying they had no proper way to reward him. Eugene simply asked for a place to rest for the night. The chief was overjoyed to offer his own humble home. The next morning, Eugene examined his new skin reinforcement ability in the privacy of his room. The black scales formed and retracted at his will, offering some protection from the sun, which would make his journey much easier. Miriam perched on his hand, scolding him for his audacious lie, especially since he couldn't even read. Eugene dismissed her concerns, stating he would be leaving soon anyway. She pressed him for his true goal, wondering why he was suddenly getting involved with the village. Just then, a villager called out that they were ready for departure, proving Eugene's point. He had gained social status overnight. He explained that humans trust authority more than words. Status could turn 100 lies into just 10. This village might be gullible, but nobles would be a different story. His plan, he declared, was to turn his lie into the truth. His past good deeds of providing food had already built a foundation of trust. The chief handed him a letter of explanation and wished him well on his journey with the young master. Felid, the boy at the center of it all, formally introduced himself, ready for their journey. Eugene looked at the boy, his mind set. He would use Felid to become a real noble. They set off from the village and traveled through the rocky highlands. Upon reaching a village called Brahms, Eugene was surprised to learn Felid could read, a skill his late mother had taught him. Felid explained his mother was of low status and had learned to read from someone she loved. A person he now knew was Sir Terwin. Miriam cheekily suggested Eugene ask the boy for reading lessons. He did just that, much to Felad's astonishment. Felad questioned how a knight could be illiterate. Eugene spun a tale of a fallen noble family, where a sword, not letters, was the key to survival. He walked on, telling the boy to doubt him, and then to believe. Once trust was earned, he mused, it could cover any lie. Miriam stifled a laugh at his top-notch acting, but warned him that overusing lies could backfire. She stopped short, noticing the look of pure belief in Felad's eyes. Felad apologized for his suspicion, admitting the villagers' talk of a monster had biased him. He vowed to judge with his own eyes from now on, even offering to secretly teach Eugene to read so he wouldn't be embarrassed. He asked to know more about Sir Eugene's past. As he spoke, a crossbow bolt flew past his face, and he cried out in shock. They were surrounded by bandits. The bandits mocked their new recruits' poor aim. Felad trembled, realizing their predicament. The lead bandit, confirming Felad's fears, told them this would be quick and ordered them to drop their belongings. Before he could finish his threat, Eugene moved in a blur of motion and the bandit's head went flying. Felad was frozen in place as the other bandits cried out in alarm. Eugene felt a new nimbleness in his movements. Another bandit charged and was cut down effortlessly, his weapon meeting Eugene's wrapped fist. A third tried to run, but was swiftly silenced, his plea for help cut short. Eugene stood over the bodies, genuinely perplexed by human greed. He questioned the last whimpering bandit if weakness was an invitation for torment, and then turned to a stunned Felad, asking if learning to read would help him understand such things. Felad was speechless. Eugene reminded the boy of his promise to see with his own eyes. He was free to believe what he wanted, but Eugene made one vow. Not a single drop of blood would touch him. They arrived in a bustling city, the marketplace alive with vendors hawking rare herbs and customers haggling over prices. Miriam zipped through the air, giddy with excitement, while Felad cautiously advised Eugene to be wary of the merchants. He explained that he'd been here before with the village chief, who always got flustered and ripped off by the exploitative vendors. An argument over prices erupted nearby, proving his point. Eugene, however, was unconcerned, noting that he had no money to be cheated out of anyway. He told Felad to wait and approached a leather merchant, offering a large pile of black wolf pelts for sale. The shopkeeper was surprised to see so much rare black wolf leather. He eyed the hooded and cloaked Eugene, assuming him to be an easy target. He dismissively pointed out the damage on the hides and offered a paltry 18 silver coins. Eugene's eyes glowed red under his hood. The merchant flinched, unnerved by the sudden intensity and the crimson gaze. A bead of sweat ran down his temple. He stammered, acknowledging the rarity of the leather and offering a slightly higher price. When Eugene remained silent, the man grew more agitated, telling him to speak up if he was dissatisfied. He laughed nervously, trying to appear generous by raising the offer to 23 coins. Eugene just hummed. The merchant, sweating profusely, bumped the price to 25 coins. Felad, watching from the side, as he anxiously added a few more coins to the offer. Eugene hummed again, louder this time, and the merchant internally cursed, wondering how much more he could be squeezed for. He finally relented, offering 30 silver coins as his absolute final price. Eugene accepted. That night, by a campfire, Eugene struggled to read, the letters still looking like worms to him despite Felad's lessons. The script was a chaotic mess to his eyes. He had purchased some decent clothes, but Miriam complained they weren't the fancy silk robes befitting a vampire. Eugene was pleased with the deal he got, remarking on the merchant's generosity. Miriam scoffed, calling the man a pushover. She recounted how Eugene had simply stared the man down, his price climbing from 18 to 30 silver coins. She chided him for not pushing for more and buying expensive silk. Eugene replied that he only needed something to block the sun. Miriam launched into a lecture about ambition, declaring that vampires were the nobles among nobles and should live in luxury, drinking blood from wine glasses. She claimed to have learned this from powerful spirits who had made it big in the human world. She advised him to learn everything, from ancient languages to how to file his taxes, since he'd be living for at least 200 years. Then she smugly admitted she couldn't read either. As Eugene asked what she was good for besides making water, Felad approached, asking who he was talking to. Eugene covered, saying he was just talking to himself, and asked about the boy's upset stomach. Felad apologized, explaining that preparing the rabbit for dinner had reminded him of the morning's carnage. Eugene reassured him that it was normal for ordinary people to be unused to seeing corpses. He then added with a smirk that he had plenty of stamina and the night was long. Felad, missing the joke, brightened up and offered to continue their reading lessons. They spent the night studying by the fire. Eugene wondered if learning was supposed to be this easy, but Felad credited it to his own amazing aptitude. Felad admitted that even he, a quick learner, took months to learn, while it normally takes a year. He then voiced his concern that simply being able to read might not be enough for Felad's sudden transition into nobility. Felad confessed the whole situation still didn't feel real, and he wasn't expecting a warm welcome from his estranged father anyway. Suddenly, They were interrupted by the arrival of a group of armed men on horseback. Their leader, a cheerful man named Partek, asked if they could share their campsite. Eugene and Felid stood up warily. Partek noted their gear and discipline, identifying them as real mercenaries, unlike the usual drifters. He asked where they were headed. Sensing it would be suspicious to lie, Eugene stated they were on their way to Lord Terwin's castle. Partek revealed they were headed to the same destination and offered to share their supplies in exchange for the spot. A young, blonde mercenary named Rabin interjected, questioning his captain's generosity. Partek apologized for his new recruit's rudeness and introduced himself, asking for Eugene's name. Eugene identified himself as Knight Jan Eugene. Rabin scoffed at the claim, pointing out Eugene's lack of armor or a horse. He bluntly asked if he was lying about being a knight, adding that he had never heard of the Eugene family. With a malicious grin, he accused him of faking it. Eugene's eyes narrowed. He was already committed to the lie with Felid. Whether these men believed him or not didn't matter initially, but their persistence was changing the situation. He considered simply killing them all. He subtly prepared to draw his weapon. As Rabin mocked him, Eugene's crimson eyes narrowed. Violence was a simple solution. Before he could act, Partek's hand shot out, grabbing the rookie by the chest. With a grunt, he slammed Rabin into the ground, the impact sending him flying. The captain quickly bowed, apologizing for his subordinate's insolence. Playing the part of a magnanimous noble, Eugene accepted the apology and told them to find their own place to camp. He knew this charade wouldn't last forever. He had to become a real knight as soon as possible to avoid further suspicion. Later, by the mercenary campfire, Rabin awoke with a start, confused about what had happened. Partek immediately began scolding him for his foolishness, questioning if he had a death wish. He struck the rookie again, reminding him that his recklessness had nearly gotten them all killed. Rabin protested, arguing that Eugene looked shabby with only a worn-out sword. Partek scoffed at his short-sightedness. He pointed out that the man's robe was padded with expensive lycanthrope leather, costing more than 3 times Rabin's monthly pay. More importantly, they had seen him reading, which meant he was no ordinary man. Partek revealed that Eugene had been moments from drawing his sword, and had he done so, most of them would have died. While Rabin had been running his mouth, Partek had observed Eugene's stance, his right hand inside his robe, his left foot drawn back. It was the perfect posture of a master swordsman ready for a deadly strike. If he had been a fraction of a second slower, Rabin would have been decapitated. The rookie truly didn't understand how terrifying knights were. Partek explained that they are born into nobility, trained to kill professionally from birth. They venture into dangerous dungeons and fight on bloody battlefields to earn their titles from high-ranking nobles, finally receiving an official appointment. To impersonate a knight was a grave crime, so Eugene was either the real deal or someone dangerously confident in his abilities. For someone his age to make such a claim meant his skills were undoubtedly high. Rabin nervously asked if Eugene was stronger than the captain, to which Partek simply replied that it was probable. The captain concluded that since they were all heading to Lord Terwin's castle, likely for the new dungeon, their paths would cross again. Overhearing their entire conversation, Eugene felt a grim satisfaction. The title of knight carried significant weight, but he needed more preparation. It was strange, he thought, that the Terwin family would hire the incompetent mercenaries he'd dealt with earlier when a professional group like this was available. An idea formed. He strode towards their campfire, and upon confirming their shared destination, he proposed they travel together. The mercenaries, still processing their captain's lecture, were stunned into silence. Partek, however, quickly agreed, wondering if the man's handsome face was a registered weapon. It had certainly disarmed his rookie. Their combined group soon arrived in Martella, the capital of the Terwin territory. Eugene was glad his ruse had worked, as traveling with them would provide valuable information. The real problem, he knew, was what came next. Miriam zipped out of his cloak, reporting that she had eavesdropped on the mercenaries as ordered. She had learned that Lord Terwin was on his deathbed, and that a new dungeon had been found in the territory, but the family lacked the men and money to explore it. The news of a dungeon piqued Eugene's interest. Miriam, however, worriedly asked what would happen to Felid if the Lord died soon. Eugene replied coldly that it was none of his concern. She pressed on, fearing the boy would be killed by his ambitious brothers. Eugene reasoned that the dying lord likely just wanted to see his son's face one last time. He told Miriam that from now on, both their fates were about to change dramatically. Just then, the driver announced they had arrived at Rose Castle. As they walked through the gates, Eugene noted that it was larger than he had expected. Miriam buzzed with excitement, telling him he needed to climb the ranks and get a castle just like it, but he quietly ordered her back into his cloak. A guard stopped them, demanding their business. Partek stepped forward to explain their purpose. Before he could finish, a man in fine clothes, Kamara Terwin, introduced himself as the heir. He ordered the mercenaries to unload their goods before turning to Eugene and Felid, demanding to know who they were. Eugene introduced himself as Knight Jan Eugene, but before he could continue, another voice interrupted, one that sent a chill down his spine. A knight in a red cape strode towards them, declaring that inspecting outsiders was his duty. Eugene would never forget that voice. It belonged to the commander of the vampire hunting unit who had discovered him in his previous life and, with young Dorit, had tormented him mercilessly. It was Knight Vertel Terwin. Vertel Terwin, the second son, sternly asked his older brother what he was doing there. Kamara retorted with a smirk, questioning if he was now supposed to report his every move. Vertel insisted that was not his meaning. Before their sibling squabble could escalate, Eugene stepped between them, presenting a letter from Broadwin's chief. Vertel recognized the village name with surprise, but it was Kamara who snatched the letter from Eugene's hand, his expression curious. As he read it, his eyes widened in disbelief. The letter detailed how the mercenaries had been killed by wolves and introduced the boy they had brought as the Lord's illegitimate son. Felid stood awkwardly under their gaze. Kamara's face split into a wide, theatrical grin as he welcomed his new brother. Vertel, however, remained serious, informing Felid that their father was waiting for him. He ordered a guard to take the boy to be washed and dressed properly, and Felid was led away in a daze. Eugene stopped Vertel with a word, stating he wanted to discuss his reward directly with Sir Terwin. Verthel's expression hardened. He refused the request. He explained that his father was unwell and offered gold instead. Eugene coolly reminded him of the effort it took to bring the boy, but Vertel warned him not to repeat himself. Kamara loudly questioned his brother's decision, arguing it was only right to introduce the newcomer to their father. Vertel retorted that their father could barely stay awake for an hour a day, and that precious time shouldn't be wasted on a stranger. Kamara sneered, accusing his brother of trying to control their father's schedule, causing Vertel to clench his jaw in frustration. Turning back to Eugene, Kamara apologized with a dramatic flourish, blaming his brother for role-playing as the heir. He then patted Eugene's shoulder dismissively and let a confused Felid into the castle. It was clear to Eugene that Vertel never intended to grant him an audience. Suddenly, a booming voice called out to the second son. A muscular man with vibrant pink hair appeared, carrying a beaten mercenary over his shoulder. He casually tossed the man to the ground with several others, explaining they were thieves he'd caught lazing about. He then suggested killing one as an example. Vertel noted that these men were hired for the dungeon raid, but agreed to discuss the matter inside. Partek, watching from the side, identified the man as Sir Galfredic. He explained that Galfredic was a knight with a bright future, having recently placed third in a major tournament. He was known for monstrous strength, having defeated over 1,000 competitors. Eugene wondered what such a man was doing here, and Partek surmised it was for the new dungeon. Successfully opening a dungeon was a huge achievement for any knight, often used as a stepping stone to serve a more powerful family. Eugene turned to Partek, confirming that the mercenary's job was complete. He then asked if he could be their next client. That night, inside the castle, Vertel oversaw Galfredic punishing the lazy mercenaries. He knew he had to open the dungeon, but his younger brother was now openly vying for power, even bringing in a formidable knight like Galfredic to secure the achievement for himself. Meanwhile, in his office, Kamara agonized over his next move. Just then, a servant knocked, announcing that Sir Eugene requested a meeting. Intrigued, Kamara allowed him in. As Eugene entered, Kamara assured him that Felid was safe and a reward would come from his father. He also expressed gratitude for the letter, which had made things much easier for him. Eugene accepted his thanks curtly. He then stated that his only business was with the Lord, and he had been rather put off by a third party's interference. Kamara's eyes narrowed slightly. He asked what Eugene truly wanted. Eugene made his demand, to be included in the dungeon raid. The request was so audacious that Kamara paused for a moment before bursting into laughter. He found the stranger far more interesting than he'd thought. He leaned back in his chair, recalling that Eugene claimed to be a knight. He had heard about the dead robbers and asked if this was just an attempt to build a reputation. He saw no reason to let him join. Eugene simply replied that he was making an offer that would cause no harm. He would take only 100 silver muns and half the loot, excluding the mana stones. Kamara admitted it was a good offer, so good, in fact, that it was suspicious, especially given the family's current financial state. Eugene just smiled and asked if he liked it or not. He reminded Kamara that he wasn't the one backed into a corner. Kamara listened to Eugene's proposal for the dungeon subjugation, finding the low fee suspicious, well below the market rate. He reasoned that knights live and die by their honor. This man appeared to be a wandering knight without a house, yet he wasn't greedy for money. It seemed honor truly came first for him. He recalled what he had heard earlier. Eugene was not the one in a hurry. He was. The realization made Kamara's eyes flash with understanding. His brother, Vertel, was a constant shadow, a rival for their father's favor. This mysterious knight, however, was different. He knew which cards to play, unlike those whose brains were nothing but muscle. With a decisive nod, Kamara accepted the offer, seeing no reason to turn down such an opportunity. He extended his hand. The deal was sealed. Mana crystals were difficult to purify and sold for high commissions, while monster byproducts sold at full value, making them far more profitable. Partek had already advised Eugene on how to secure the deal, suggesting he introduce a well-known trading company and focus on the byproducts. Kamara, trapped by the logic, had no choice but to agree. Later, Vertel and Galfredic discussed the new addition to their party. Galfredic scoffed at the last-minute change, calling it a desperate move. A dungeon was no playground. It was a place of life and death. He was against bringing in some amateur who would only hinder them, especially one recruited by Kamara. He noted that Kamara's connections were weak and asked Vertel to deliver the bad news himself, a request Vertel deftly dodged. When Kamara entered, he apologized for the delay, explaining he had been chatting with his new knight. With a flourish, he gestured to the doorway. He introduced Knight Jan Eugene and his mercenary band. Vertel recognized the man from before, now with mercenaries in tow. He respectfully voiced his objection, stating they couldn't accept someone of unknown origin and skill. Kamara countered smoothly, vouching for Eugene's skill. He shared what he had learned about the bandits causing trouble on the edge of the territory, a headache they had yet to solve. On his way to the castle, Sir Eugene had single-handedly taken care of them with only a short sword. Surely, his skills were more than adequate. As Kamara spoke, a knife came flying through the air, aimed directly at Eugene. He deflected it with his sword, sending it crashing into a nearby wall. Galfredic grinned, impressed. He rose from his seat, acknowledging Eugene's presence with a grudging wow. He apologized for his rudeness, remarking on Eugene's pristine appearance before challenging him to a duel to prove his skills. Word of the duel spread like wildfire, and a crowd quickly gathered in the castle courtyard. People were eager to see the famed knight who could supposedly tear monsters apart with his bare hands. As the two fighters took their positions, the spectators began to feel sorry for Eugene, who looked more like a scholar than a warrior. Galfredic stood ready, a confident smile on his face. He held his great sword with ease, his eyes sharp and focused. Eugene remained stoic, his expression unreadable behind his mask. He tossed his own sword into the air, catching it with a flourish. The referee called for them to begin, and with the ringing of a bell, Galfredic charged. Their swords clashed in a shower of sparks. The two exchanged a flurry of blows, with Galfredic's raw power meeting Eugene's swift, precise movements. The force of their strikes sent shockwaves through the courtyard. Rabin cheered, convinced Eugene was overwhelming his opponent, but Partek corrected him, explaining that Galfredic was merely sizing him up, intentionally letting himself be pushed back. Galfredic continued his assault, his grin widening. He noted that Eugene's swordsmanship was crude, unpolished, without a discernible style. He fought like someone who grew up in the wild. As he parried another blow, a thought struck him. He leaned in close and whispered, his voice laced with amusement, that he suspected Eugene's claim of being a knight was a lie. Galfredic taunted Eugene, pointing out his sloppy stance and rootless swordsmanship, evidence that he relied on raw ability rather than proper training. Eugene retorted that Galfredic talked too much. With a manic grin, Galfredic challenged him to prove his worth in combat. The duel resumed with renewed intensity. Their blades met again and again, the force of Galfredic's strikes sending tremors through the ground. He kicked forward, but Eugene deftly dodged the blow. Eugene parried a fierce downward slash, the impact of their swords echoing across the courtyard, cracking the paving stones beneath them. Vertel watched with stunned disbelief, wondering if his brother's new recruit had passed out. But from the dust cloud, Eugene rose, his voice cold as he asked, "Who did?" He charged forward, a blur of motion, and met Galfredic's blade with his own. Their swords locked in a deadly dance. Galfredic was impressed by how quickly Eugene adapted to his fighting style. Eugene sidestepped a powerful swing and met the next blow head-on, the resulting clash sending sparks flying. They moved like whirlwinds of steel, their faces inches apart, locked in a ferocious stalemate. They broke apart, and Galfredic laughed, amazed at the strength packed into Eugene's smaller frame. Eugene had to admit that in terms of raw power, Galfredic was overwhelmingly superior. But he had another advantage: experience. With a sudden, unexpected move, Galfredic broke Eugene's stance and sent him stumbling backward. He pressed his advantage, his movements becoming more fluid and aggressive. Eugene found himself on the defensive, forced to retreat under a relentless barrage of attacks. Eugene's fighting style was chaotic, unpredictable. He sidestepped another blow and landed a solid punch to Galfredic's face. There were no precise movements, only raw, instinct-driven combat. Galfredic wondered where this man had come from. With his fist still planted on Eugene's chest, he conceded defeat. In a final, explosive move, Eugene unleashed a punch to his face, sending Galfredic flying across the courtyard and crashing into a wall. Galfredic lay amidst the rubble, defeated. The referee, dumbfounded, declared the winner, Knight Jan Eugene. The crowd erupted in cheers, astonished by the unknown knight's incredible strength. Rabin proudly claimed Eugene as our knight. Galfredic slowly picked himself up from the wreckage, his eyes blinking in disbelief. The courtyard fell silent as he approached Eugene, a strange, fiery glow emanating from his eyes. Eugene watched him warily. Galfredic grabbed him by the shoulders and, with a booming laugh, declared him the winner of the night, raising his arm in victory. The crowd roared his name, much to Verthel's shock and dismay. From that day on, everything changed. Kamara greeted Eugene the next morning with effusive praise, though he noted that Eugene had refused all the amenities he'd sent. Rabin, now a devoted follower, rushed to his side at the mere mention of his name. Even Galfredic greeted him like an old friend, complaining theatrically about his injuries. Eugene, unimpressed, wondered if he wanted another beating. Galfredic, undeterred, invited him to another sparring match. It seemed Galfredic cared little whether Eugene was a real knight or not. The constant attention was suffocating. The castle staff, under Kamara's orders, fussed over him constantly, ensuring he ate and rested well for the dungeon raid. They even drew the curtains, having heard of his sensitive skin. Miriam found the whole situation hilarious, but Eugene, overwhelmed, dismissed them all, stating he preferred to be alone. He instructed them to relay his message to Kamara, word for word, explaining that after a dozen years in the mountains, he preferred solitude. His plan was working. Even those who had doubted him were beginning to let go of their suspicions. But the constant attention was still unnerving. As he walked through the castle halls, he was surrounded by his newfound admirers, Galfredic already goading him for another fight. Just then, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. It was Felid, who greeted him with a warm smile and asked if he had been well. Under the pale moonlight, screams echoed through the castle grounds. The pleas for mercy were cut short by sickening thuds. Vertel Terwin stood over a mangled corpse, wiping blood from his hands. He seethed with rage, blaming the incompetent fool before him for the failure to kill Felid back in the village. If the job had been done right, the red-eyed knight would never have appeared, and his plans would not have been derailed. His fury was palpable. The man, a subordinate, apologized profusely, explaining that the mercenaries he'd hired were supposed to be reliable. Vertel scoffed, punching the man for his stupidity. How could he not see that the mercenaries were worthless? He questioned if the man's eyes were merely for decoration, then threatened to gouge them out if they were indeed useless, holding a dagger to the terrified man's face. Other subordinates watched in horror as their colleague was brutalized. With a final disgusted sigh, Vertel dropped the bloody dagger. He couldn't openly kill someone who had already made his way into the castle, but an idea began to form. It was the only way, and it would make disposing of the body much cleaner. Felid would have to go. Eugene found Felid in his chambers, relaying Verthel's order for him to join the dungeon expedition. Felid's face paled. He had come to the castle expecting to die, and now he was being sent into a dungeon to do just that. Eugene explained the situation calmly, reminding him of the mercenaries who had been sent to the village. They had been hired by one of his brothers to prevent him from reaching the castle safely. His brothers did not want him there, but there was a way for him to live. He offered Felid a choice: become his servant. As a 16-year-old who had already had his coming-of-age ceremony, Felid was free to choose his own path without a guardian's consent. He could wait for someone in his life, or he could struggle until the very end. The day of the dungeon opening arrived. Galfredic briefed the party, explaining that since the dungeon was unexplored, the monsters within were unknown. Based on the entrance's size, they could expect low-rank goblins and kobolds, with mid-rank trolls or giant spiders deeper in. Their goal was to clear a path to the mid-rank area and retreat immediately if they encountered a high-rank monster. The first step was to scout for any nearby monster burrows. Among the soldiers, morale was low. Some planned to feign injury and stay back, knowing that first-time dungeon raids were notoriously brutal and the pay was lousy. Their grumbling was cut short when Vertel appeared, demanding to know where Felid was. The soldiers stammered, unsure of the boy's whereabouts. One pointed towards Eugene's group, where Felid was offering Eugene a small bag of food for the journey. Verthel's face twisted in disgust. He stormed over, angered that Felid was dawdling with the low-born wretch. He grabbed the boy, reminding him of his orders to wait in his assigned position, and demanded he shoulder his pack immediately. When Felid hesitated, Verthel's voice rose to a furious shout. Before he could lay a hand on the boy, Eugene intervened, his grip like iron on Verthel's wrist. Vertel was shocked by the audacity. Eugene's voice was dangerously low as he questioned the wisdom of sending an inexperienced boy into a dungeon opening, sarcastically asking if Vertel had lost his mind and started a new charity called Send a Boy to His Doom. Vertel, enraged, accused him of being disrespectful, insisting he only wanted to make his little brother strong. He warned Eugene to know his place, reminding him he was in no position to be ordering anyone around. Eugene simply replied that it was Vertel who didn't know his place. He then dropped a bombshell. The day before, Felid had become his servant. He gestured to the crowd of mercenaries and knights, stating that everyone present could attest to it. He declared their bond was now thicker than blood, and any harm that came to the boy would be considered a direct challenge to him. He invited Vertel to a warm-up spar before entering the dungeon, if he felt so inclined. Vertel sputtered, demanding to know who gave him permission to do such a thing. He argued that taking in another family's illegitimate child would ruin Eugene's future. But his words were drowned out by the chatter of the soldiers, who were now buzzing with confidence, reassured by the presence of two powerful knights like Eugene and Galfredic. One soldier joked that it would take a second lifetime for him to reach their level. Kamara appeared, clapping Vertel on the back with a cheerful grin. He declared that he, too, would have no problem entrusting his brother to Sir Eugene. He reminded Vertel that Felid was an adult and free to choose his own path. Eugene watched the unfolding drama with a detached amusement. Once the weak become targets, survival is not easy. Even if they hold their breath, the predator will always find them. Verthel's face was a mask of pure fury. But for the weak, the only way to survive is to form a pack. And as for reading, Eugene mused he was learning. A scout returned, reporting no signs of roamers or escaped monsters. With a shared look, Galfredic and Eugene agreed it was time to proceed. The order was given to open the dungeon. Galfredic reminded the men that their lives were in their own hands, and with a final command, they advanced. As the party disappeared into the darkness, Kamara and Felid watched from the entrance. Kamara promised they would meet again in 4 days, while Felid wished Eugene a safe return. The heavy stone doors swung shut, sealing them inside. The oppressive darkness of the dungeon swallowed the torchlight, its air thick with the stench of blood and fear. The hastily assembled party was in disarray. A mercenary, saved from a goblin's maw at the last second, gasped for air, his relief quickly turning to rage as he cursed his disorganized comrades. Sir Galfredic, his face a mask of fury, roared at the man to maintain formation. Discipline, however, was a luxury they couldn't afford. Galfredic shouted orders, and arrows flew from the center rank, felling monsters dropping from the ceiling. But for every goblin that fell, 2 more swarmed forward, threatening to breach their fragile shield wall. One mercenary, consumed by terror, decided that volunteering had been a spectacularly bad idea. His nerve broke, and he scrambled to flee back the way they came. The folly of his decision became apparent moments later when a pack of goblins with glowing eyes emerged from the darkness to intercept him. Galfredic appeared behind him, his voice dripping with contempt. He grabbed the man by the collar, reminding him that safety in this place only existed within the group. He shoved the man back towards the line, his frustration mounting as he watched the chaotic melee unfold. He wondered how he was supposed to conquer anything with such a pathetic excuse for an army. As if on cue, a scout cried out that more monsters were pushing in from the rear. They were caught in a pincer. Cursing, Galfredic began barking orders for a 2-pronged defense. But before he could finish, a calm voice cut through the noise. Eugene announced he would take the rear. Galfredic tried to warn him of the danger of going alone, but Eugene was already gone. A faint clanking of discarded armor was the only sound he left behind. Galfredic stared in disbelief. Black, swirling marks scarred the stone floor where Eugene had just been standing. Snapping out of his stupor, Galfredic ordered Partek to follow Eugene and cover him, amazed at the impossible speed the man possessed. They found him moments later, standing calmly in a corridor littered with goblin corpses. He held up a faintly glowing plant, asking innocently if it was valuable. Galfredic could only stare, dumbfounded that a man this powerful didn't even recognize glowgrass. Before anyone could answer, Eugene crushed the plant, its light extinguishing in his hand as if it were a common weed. During a brief respite, the mercenaries collected the mana crystals from the fallen monsters. The meager handful was a disappointing reward for their efforts. Eugene examined the small, blue crystals, noting they were different from the red one he'd taken from the roamer. Miriam appeared beside him, explaining that a crystal's quality was proportional to the monster's strength. She reminded him that the alligator he absorbed was an unusually large and powerful roamer, strong enough to usurp her territory and a rare find indeed. He crushed the useless blue crystals in his hand. This venture was proving to be a waste of time unless he could find a high-level monster. Suddenly, Eugene looked up, his senses alert. Just as Galfredic was yelling for the break to end, he announced he would take the front alongside him, warning that anyone who fled would be punished. Eugene glanced at the exhausted mercenaries and told Galfredic that he would have to step up his game. The monsters they were about to face, he explained, would be on a completely different level. He pointed down the corridor, explaining that the true powers of the dungeon would use the goblins as mere soldiers. Indeed, enthroned in the darkness ahead sat a hulking orc, flanked by his minions. The men swallowed nervously. Beyond these intermediate monsters, Eugene continued, lay the high-level creatures in the dungeon's core. He recalled that day in the swamp. Consuming the roamer's red crystal had granted him a powerful new ability, and he was intensely curious if another such crystal would grant him a second one. His enhanced hearing picked up the approaching horde. He informed Galfredic there were at least 50, about 100 meters out, with 3 heavier sets of footsteps in the back. The pink-haired knight's eyes widened in surprise. He offered Eugene a heavy spear. Eugene accepted it. With a surge of red energy, he hurled the weapon forward. It shot through the darkness like a beam of light, piercing a dozen goblins in a perfect line. Fired up by the display, Galfredic roared for everyone to charge. He ordered his men to follow and support their new vanguard. But there was no supporting a hurricane. As the men advanced, Eugene was already a blur of black scales and red light within the enemy ranks. He punched through an orc skull with a dagger, his movements too fast and brutal to comprehend. He paused for a moment, a feral grin on his face as he licked the monster's blood from his lips. On that day, the image of the noble knight the mercenaries had admired was shattered. What they witnessed was not honorable swordsmanship or upright justice. It was not the dignified combat of a noble warrior. This was unlike any knight they had ever known. It was a style far beyond their admiration. It was the raw, unrestrained fury of a bloody beast. The battle was over, but the silence was heavy. Mercenaries tended to the wounded, their faces grim among the bodies of men and monsters. Sir Galfredic surveyed the scene with a heavy heart. His forces were spent, not from physical wounds, but from a mental exhaustion of witnessing Eugene's brutal efficiency, and decided they could not advance any further. He approached, suggesting they withdraw now that their objective was met. Eugene sat up, stating he wasn't tired and that turning back now felt like a waste. He told them they were free to leave without him, a statement that left Galfredic with no real choice but to push onward together. But as Eugene rose from a mangled corpse, he changed his mind. He ordered Galfredic to lead the main party out of the dungeon, declaring that only he and his own mercenaries would proceed. The knight was stunned, then humbled. He realized this wasn't arrogance, but a hidden consideration for the soldiers' fatigue. He watched Eugene walk away, reconsidering what it truly meant to be a knight. Deeper in the dungeon, Eugene, Partek, and Rabin navigated a passage thick with webs. Rabin was sweating bullets, cursing himself for getting dragged along into the terrifying depths. He tried to calm his nerves by reminding himself that Eugene could probably handle anything. A sudden crunch under his foot made him jump. He looked down with wide eyes at a small, crushed spider. It was a fatal mistake. The walls and ceiling came alive with a horde of giant arachnids. They were cave-great spiders, monsters that melted their prey with acidic poison. Rabin screamed and flailed wildly. Partek yelled that they should fall back, but Eugene was already a blur of motion, dismissing the swarm's numbers as nothing. Left with no choice, Partek urged Rabin to join the fight, and the three plunged into the fray. Rabin was quickly overwhelmed, crying for help as he was swarmed. A massive spider lunged for his face, only to be intercepted by a flash of steel. Rabin stared in shock. Eugene had saved him. He shoved the young mercenary aside and faced the tide of monsters alone. "You're incredible, Sir Eugene." Rabin gushed, now safe. He then immediately suggested that since they'd clearly done enough, it was a great time to leave. He turned to his captain for support, but Partek was completely silent, his legs trembling. The veteran mercenary stared into the darkness ahead, his face pale with a dawning horror. He recognized the monstrous size, identifying the higher-rank variant as a lord. A colossal spider lord emerged from the shadows, its many eyes glowing with malice. Partek begged Eugene to retreat, insisting they were no match for such a creature. Eugene calmly addressed his two men by name. He ordered them to withdraw, his voice cold and final as he declared the beast was his prey. Partek could only agree, feeling an overwhelming primal fear that commanded him to flee the crushing presence of the two beings. As the mercenaries scrambled away, Miriam appeared beside Eugene, cheekily noting that the mortal's instincts had wisely told them to nope out of there. Eugene asked if this lord was on par with the Swamp Master. Miriam corrected him. This one was likely even stronger. A predatory smile touched Eugene's lips at the thought of an even bigger mana crystal. The spider lord let out a shriek. He met its gaze, telling the roamer to struggle all it liked. The battle ended not with a bang, but with the quiet descent of a spider on its silken thread. It rappelled down towards a teacup, only to be casually swatted aside by the man who sat there, unbothered. The spider lord's mana crystal was gone, and in its place, a new mark on Eugene's arm glowed before fading. He had gained a second ability, camouflage. By layering his hardened, protective scales underneath, he could now project an illusion of human skin over top, a perfect disguise. He was finally able to walk in the sunlight. His unmasking did not go unnoticed. At a celebratory feast, he found himself the center of attention. Noble women swarmed him, lamenting that such a handsome face had been hidden for so long and begging to hear of his solo victory against the cave great spider. Miriam zipped by his ear, invisible to all, teasing that he was being sucked dry by the attention. One woman, blushing, wondered aloud if his ethereal beauty meant he had elven blood. Eugene internally sighed. This was getting more troublesome by the second. Galfredic, however, seized the idea with gusto. He declared that it all made sense now. Eugene's sharp eyes in the dungeon, his hearing that was as keen as a wild dog's. The knight connected the dots between his monstrous strength and agile movements, concluding he couldn't possibly be a normal human. He boisterously announced that Eugene must have elven blood. Then, a surprisingly sharp question followed. How had someone so striking managed to stay hidden for so long? Eugene smiled faintly, coolly replying that he had never intentionally tried to hide. The simple, confident answer left his audience breathless. Galfredic noted his complete lack of expression, while the women simply swooned. Eugene mused that people truly see what they want to see, realizing the elf excuse would be a useful tool. But the crystal had given him more than an ability. The moment the mark vanished, a flash of an unknown memory struck him. He saw himself lying in a strange bed as a soft hand held his. A bell tolled, and he was surrounded by unfamiliar faces, all watching him. He wondered who the woman was and if the memories were even his own. As someone with amnesia, the only fragment of his past he could recall was the name whispered in the dark. Eugene. His thoughts were shattered by Rabin shrieking his name. The young mercenary was begging for help while being held in a crushing headlock by Galfredic. The knight was berating him for being dead weight, and Rabin desperately argued that any normal person would have run away because Eugene wasn't human. Galfredic twisted his words, roaring if he was calling Eugene a monster before promising him hellish training. Ignoring the chaos, Eugene focused on the new clue to his identity. A hunch was forming. He suspected that by erasing the marks on his body one by one, he could uncover the truth, not the lies about being a knight or an elf, but who he truly was. Later, they stood before the dying Lord Terwin. After Kamara's report, Galfredic introduced himself, and Eugene followed suit, presenting himself as Jan of House Eugene. Kamara then presented him with a box. Inside was a certificate formally guaranteeing his new status. As Eugene accepted the scroll, Miriam cheered that he was finally official. The old lord began coughing violently, telling his son he couldn't die in peace while worrying about Verthel's ambition. Kamara swore he would protect the domain, but his father corrected him. A domain was just land. A true lord looks after his people. With that, his hand went limp. As many grieved, Eugene noticed that not everyone shared the sentiment, particularly a snarling Vertel. At sunset, Eugene prepared to depart during the funeral. He apologized to Kamara, who understood. Galfredic was surprised he wasn't staying, but Eugene explained it would be a waste not to explore the newly opened dungeon one more time. Galfredic expressed his regret, saying a certain count would have liked him. He offered a handshake, saying it was an honor to fight a strong knight and hoping their next meeting wouldn't be his enemies. After a brief pause, Eugene accepted the gesture. As Galfredic rode away, Felid was confused. He asked Partek why Eugene was leaving after saying he would stay. Partek explained that knights ride horses, and they were now heading to a trading company to sell their loot and buy Eugene him out. Eager to prove his worth, Felid declared he would do his utmost to assist. But Eugene's cold voice cut him off, stating his assistance wouldn't be needed for now. Felid stood frozen in confusion. The next thing he knew, he was carrying crates under the watchful eye of a shouting foreman. He was in Marin, the greatest commerce city in the kingdom of Kaler, far from his new master. Under the bright Marin sky, the docks buzzed with activity. At the trading company, Rabin puffed out his chest, proudly declaring that the mountain of dungeon byproducts was the work of one man, Sir Jan Eugene. The name sent a ripple through the crowd, who recognized him as the legendary knight rumored to have ripped a troll's head off with his bare hands. Meanwhile, Felid worked tirelessly, shooing away curious merchants from the valuable goods. He wiped sweat from his brow, glancing up at the company building and wondering what was taking Eugene so long. Inside, a mustachioed man named Billmore was enthusiastically taking responsibility for handling Eugene's haul. Eugene noted that Partek's connection was to a surprisingly large-scale company, which would be useful for someone like him who was still navigating human society. As Billmore continued his sales pitch, the door behind him slammed open. A stern-looking man with a monocle strode in, swatting Billmore aside and demanding to know which of them was Sir Eugene. Eugene sat unimpressed. Partek leaned in, whispering that this could get awkward. He explained the newcomer was Grail, secretary to the company's deputy manager, a man with far more power than Billmore. He was likely here to lowball them. Partek advised caution. Grail shoved Billmore away, telling him not to challenge a superior. He then addressed Eugene, mentioning the harbor rumors about a knight who single-handedly brought in a mountain of loot. He dismissed it as a newbie's tactic to inflate prices, then condescendingly offered a personal contract with the deputy manager, intending to fleece the brat for all he was worth. But as he met Eugene's gaze, he froze, a sudden, inexplicable pressure filling the room. Grail's arrogance evaporated into a cold sweat. He quickly apologized, reintroducing himself properly and framing the contract as a great opportunity. Eugene simply asked what kind of opportunity it was. Stammering, Grail said it was a chance to sell onto better terms. Eugene feigned surprise, asking if the deputy manager would personally handle it. The shift in power was palpable, and Grail began to panic, apologizing profusely for any discourtesy. He then excused himself and fled the room. Billmore, watching the scene unfold with Partek and a confused Eugene, was moved to tears. He couldn't believe Eugene had rejected a deal with the deputy manager on his account. He swore his unwavering support from that day on. When he eagerly asked when they could begin, Eugene looked at him blankly. He told the man to get out. The proceedings were starting now. Elsewhere, Grail reported his failure to the deputy manager, a sharp-featured woman with fiery hair. She wasn't surprised, remarking that a knight's pride often made business difficult. She smiled, a predatory glint in her eyes, and said they would simply have to make things difficult for him in return. After all, he was just a poor knight who didn't even own a horse. She ordered Grail to deliver a gift to Eugene, one a penniless knight couldn't possibly refuse. Outside, Eugene instructed a stunned Felid to stay in Marin and continue selling the byproducts. He was to keep bringing all future monster parts to Billmore. Felid asked why he was being left behind again, wondering if his skills were still lacking. Eugene cut him off, asking him to define a retainer's role. Felid correctly answered that it was to support their knight in battle and daily life. Eugene explained that by managing the business and accumulating wealth, Felid would be supporting him. That was his mission. He would live and work with Billmore, learning the trade. Remembering that Eugene had saved his life, Felid suppressed his disappointment. Eugene then offered a promise. Once they had enough funds, he would consider teaching Felid the sword. Someday, he would be needed on the battlefield too. The young man's eyes widened, and he placed a hand over his heart, pledging to follow his orders. After purchasing supplies, Eugene and Partek were left with an empty purse. Miriam sniffled theatrically, mourning their financial state. As they walked, Eugene noticed a gleaming suit of plate armor in a shop window. Partek called it a dream for every knight, explaining its immense value. Such armor was often passed down through generations. Their conversation was interrupted by Rabin sprinting towards them. He breathlessly announced that a huge roamer horde had appeared just outside the city. The local guilds were barely holding them back. Partek immediately suggested they join the fight. Before he could even explain why, Rabin was already buzzing with excitement. He pointed out that roamer hunts had no commission fees, and Marin was a city overflowing with capital. It was the perfect chance to get rich. He spelled it out for his captain. This meant a huge pile of money. That was all Eugene needed to hear. He declared they were going, as there was no reason to hesitate. Partek, surprised by a sudden reversal, tried to stop him, but a winded Grail arrived with a magnificent black warhorse. It was a gift from the deputy manager. Grail nervously described its flawless pedigree, but Eugene was already focused on the bigger prize. The secretary stammered that the gift was simply a token of appreciation, flinching under Eugene's intense stare. The horse snorted, equally intimidated. Eugene mounted the steed, telling Grail to pass on his thanks before galloping away. Miriam cheered him on, ready to go rake in some cash. Rabin watched him go, marveling at the horse's speed. Partek yelled at him to stop gawking and run after him, leaving Grail to watch them go with a wry expression. In the forest east of Marin, goblins scattered at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Eugene and his new warhorse thundered past, a whirlwind of steel and fury cutting down every monster in their path. Miriam noted the massive scale of the horde, and Eugene grimly calculated that most of the guild members defending the line were likely already dead. His lips curled into a smile. That was good news. He didn't like sharing loot. Eugene charged through the forest, his warhorse's hooves thundering against the earth. He broke through the canopy and into the bright sun, emerging onto a battlefield already thick with conflict. At the head of the Marin defense was a lone, blonde-haired knight, defiantly holding the line against a horde of orcs. She swore they would not pass unless they killed her first. Her heroic stand lasted approximately 3 seconds before a stray arrow spooked her horse, which promptly bucked her off and galloped away. She landed hard, spitting out a mouthful of dirt. As she tried to rally, she looked up and saw that the monsters had stopped, staring past her as if she wasn't there. Her bravado instantly vanished, replaced by a shriek for help as she scrambled away. An orc's club whistled past where her head had been, but a black-clad rider intervened. Eugene became a whirlwind of death, cutting down the monsters that surrounded the fallen knight. He cleared a circle of safety around her. She thanked him for the rescue, but as she asked his name, she let out another shriek. Eugene calmly asked if his name was really important right now, pointing out it would be pointless if she died. She laughed, conceding his point. She declared that once they survived this hell, she would ask for his name again. Later, in a crowded Marin tavern, that same night, Madrika recounted the tale with dramatic flair. She spoke of how she and a mysterious dark knight fought back to back, slaying goblins without mercy to protect the city. When the crowd demanded to know the identity of this hero, she pointed a finger dramatically and announced his name was Jan Eugene. The tavern erupted with cheers for their newfound hero. From a window high above, the mayor of Marin, Louis Palin, watched the celebration below. He noted with displeasure that the more famous Eugene became, the harder he would be to control. His granddaughter, the fiery-haired deputy manager Preachella, assured him everything was under control. In fact, she hoped Eugene's reputation would grow even larger. The higher he soared, the greater his fear of falling would be. A subordinate then approached, asking about the squire Eugene had with him. Preachella revealed her investigation had uncovered that the boy was a hidden, illegitimate child of the Terwin family. The mayor's eyes lit up with understanding. Preachella laid out her theory. Eugene was using the boy to build a relationship with the future head of the Terwin family. The mayor saw her plan immediately. She intended to buy off the knight sponsoring the child. He decided he would also send a gift, as was proper for the mayor to do for the city's hero, and offered to put her in as a referral. Preachella thanked him. That night, she sipped a drink, musing that the thirsty always seek water. As a merchant, her job was simple. Dig a well before the right person becomes thirsty. She would wait until Eugene came to drink from it. The door to her office opened, and she looked up from her seat. "Welcome," she said with a predatory smile. "Marin's hero, Sir Jan Eugene." Eugene, now clad in magnificent black and red plate armor, entered the lavish room and introduced himself, asking if she was Preachella. She confirmed, inviting him to sit. She studied him, a beautiful yet terrifying man, so different from the knights she was used to. She complimented the armor, a gift from the mayor, and proudly stated it was commissioned from Marin's finest workshop. She boasted that it was forged from special steel mixed with ogre bones, making it nearly indestructible. Eugene replied that he was sure it would prove sturdy. He then thanked her for the lodging and food, which had put his mercenaries in good condition for the next subjugation. Preachella smiled, saying that if he was so grateful, perhaps he'd listen to her proposal. But Eugene stood, announcing he was a busy person and had to leave. Stunned, she could only watch as he walked away. He paused, saying he would stop by again after the Terwin dungeon was cleared. Then, on second thought, he added that his current contract was only for the byproducts from this one trip. He was going to focus on mana crystals next time, a statement that made Preachella's eyes narrow in fury. As he bid her goodbye, she called out for him to wait. He paused at the door. She insisted they had more to discuss. When he feigned ignorance, her patience snapped. Her subordinates listed the expensive gifts they had provided, the armor, the warhorse, the luxury hotel, and pointed out that the byproducts he'd sold didn't even cover half the cost. She asked if he truly thought everything came without a price, threatening to expose him as a shameless, honorless knight to the very people who now praised him, the dear hero of Marin. Preachella stood before him, questioning if he would simply walk away after taking everything from her. She challenged him to argue his case. A slow smirk spread across Eugene's face. He found the entire situation utterly ridiculous. The deputy manager listed her grievances, accusing him of ordering her around, accepting unsolicited gifts, and now facing a demand for payment. His eyes flashed a dangerous red. He wondered aloud if a mere merchant was truly attempting to threaten him. The sudden shift in pressure silenced the room, shocking Preachella. Eugene took a step forward, making his position clear. He already had a contract with her company through a subordinate, and he cared little for public opinion as long as his goods were purchased. He then turned her own words against her, reminding her that everything has a price. If she continued to run her mouth, he warned, she would discover exactly what that price entailed. He framed her actions as a conspiracy, where the city and its most powerful trading company were persecuting the very knight who had saved them. If that was how they treated their heroes, no one would step forward to defend Marin in the future. Having said his piece, he turned to leave. Partek, with a theatrical sigh, remarked on how unfortunate the situation was. He added that a better approach from her could have forged a strong relationship, leaving Preachella seething in silence. Just as he reached the door, she called out for him to wait. In a stunning reversal, Preachella offered a deep, formal apology for her discourtesy. She admitted that her desire to gain the upper hand had clouded her judgment and asked for a chance to start over. She proposed amending their current contract with new, favorable clauses, assuring him he would have nothing to worry about. Internally, she reflected on the foolishness of most knights who wagged their tails for wealth and fame. But this man was different. He was far too dangerous to trifle with. Her merchant's instinct screamed at her not to let this opportunity escape. A calculated smile returned to her face. Eugene paused, agreeing to at least hear her out. He warned her, however, that the offer had better be tempting. Preachella thanked him for his mercy, subtly reclaiming a sliver of control. Later, clad in his new armor and mounted on a magnificent warhorse, Eugene rode through the forest. Miriam zipped around his head, declaring him the coolest person in the world. Partek walked beside him, congratulating him on securing such a favorable contract. He explained the immense scale of the Palin Trading Company, with hundreds of branches across the empire, particularly their deep ties with noble houses like the Terwins. The offer of unlimited access to dungeons connected to their branches was, as Partek put it, more valuable than an appointment from a noble house. He praised Eugene's brilliant negotiation tactics, but Eugene brushed it off, claiming he was simply annoyed at the time. Their path was suddenly blocked by a group of rough-looking mercenaries. One of them mocked Eugene's pretty face, questioning if he could even hold a sword. Miriam indignantly called the man a rotten potato face. From behind the mercenaries, Kamara emerged, greeting Eugene with a wry smile. He playfully asked if he should now address Eugene as Lord Terwin. Eugene ignored the jest and asked for an update. Kamara explained that his brother, Hell, had hired a new band of mercenaries who seemed just as nasty as the last group that had been wiped out by wolves. They gave off a distinctly unpleasant feeling. For that reason, Kamara formally requested that Eugene serve as the commander of the dungeon subjugation party. Before Eugene could respond, the bald leader of the new mercenaries interrupted. He crudely asked if he would become commander should Eugene happen to die in the dungeon. Kamara's men bristled with indignation, but the mercenary leader was unfazed, arguing that they weren't on a picnic. In a dungeon, he reasoned, life was cheap, and one must prepare for the worst. Eugene met his gaze, agreeing that he would be counting on the man to take over if needed. He then addressed the entire party, confirming that if he fell, Baldy would be in charge, and with that, ordered them to advance. As they walked, Miriam cursed the mercenary under her breath, and Eugene quietly agreed. Kamara confirmed his suspicions. Hell had hired the men to kill Eugene inside the dungeon. As a combined force entered the cavern, Eugene thought to himself that watching Verthel's plan inevitably fail might be rather fun. Without warning, he plunged into the goblins, his blade a blur of motion. He moved within human speed, cutting down monster after monster in a whirlwind of violence. The bald mercenary leader watched in awe, realizing the rumors were true. Eugene was single-handedly doing the work of 100 men, his presence an overwhelming shield for the entire party. The man gritted his teeth, knowing he would have to wait for the perfect opening. All he needed was one chance to graze Eugene with his poison-coated sword. After clearing the initial wave, Eugene stopped them. He announced that they were entering the territory of mid-rank monsters, and he could no longer guarantee anyone's safety. He repeated his warning. Only those confident in their ability to keep up should follow. Verthel's mercenaries eagerly agreed, seeing their chance approaching. To their surprise, Partek ordered his own men to halt. He explained to a confused Rabbin that their commander had a different plan in mind. Eugene walked deeper into the cave alone, musing that the raid was far less entertaining without Sir Galfredic. He recalled the knight's exemplary leadership, his knack for boosting morale, and his courage in taking the most dangerous positions. With a true leader like him, even this rabble might have cleared the dungeon. Now, Eugene was curious. If Galfredic were here, how would he handle a party of traitors? As if on cue, the mercenaries surrounded him, their intentions clear. Eugene smirked, glad they had finally dropped the act. He told them that if they were so eager to die, he would happily oblige. The men panicked as Miriam began to gather a swirling sphere of water magic. The spell shot out, not as an attack, but as a wave that instantly extinguished every torch in the cavern, plunging them into absolute darkness. Chaos erupted. Blind and terrified, the mercenaries shoved one another, their panicked movements causing accidental injuries. Suddenly, a scream pierced the darkness as one of them fell, his throat slit. They were being attacked. In their frenzy, they began swinging wildly, cutting down their own allies in the disorienting dark. Flashes of red light. Eugene's attacks weaved through the mayhem, each one finding a fatal mark, turning their ambush into a self-inflicted slaughterhouse. The mercenary leader fumbled desperately with his flint and tinder, realizing the darkness only made Eugene more deadly. He had to get a light, he just had to. Then, an unnatural silence fell. He froze, wondering why it was suddenly so quiet. Soft footsteps approached him in the dark. A voice whispered directly beside his ear, asking if he needed fire. Before he could react, a hand seized his throat, lifting him off the ground. Eugene's voice was laced with chilling amusement as he remarked on how inconvenient human eyes were in the dark. A massive, monstrous shadow with glowing red eyes materialized behind him, a manifestation of pure killing intent. Eugene asked the choking man if he could see more clearly now. Could he see who was the hunter, and who was the hunted? The mercenary leader could only manage a choked curse. This wasn't a knight, staring into the face of a predator baring its fangs. He knew what he was facing. It was a monster. On a dark and stormy night, Eugene returned to the Terwin castle. Kamara rushed to meet him, his face etched with worry as Eugene stood silently, his expression unreadable. The new lord urgently asked if the rumors were true. Just then, Hell appeared, demanding to know the cause of the commotion. In response, Eugene simply dropped the battered form of the mercenary leader at their feet. Both brothers recognized the man, Sir Maverick, with shock. Under Eugene's thrall, the man confessed that he had tried to kill him on Hell Terwin's orders. Hell immediately denied the accusation, claiming the man had lost his mind. Kamara, enraged, confronted his brother about how far he was willing to go. Hell retorted that Kamara was a fool for believing a madman, grabbing Maverick and demanding he explain himself properly. The mercenary's confession twisted into a bizarre display of devotion. He cried out in anguish, lamenting how he could have ever dared to raise a hand against his new lord. He declared that trash like him deserved to die and, before anyone could react, threw himself through the nearest window. The brothers stared in horror as his body impacted a statue in the courtyard below. Vertel seized the opportunity, arguing that Maverick had clearly gone mad from the horrors of the dungeon. But Kamara saw through it, noting how relieved his brother seemed that the only witness was dead. Vertel then turned his fury on Eugene, accusing him of slander and lacking a knight's pride. Eugene calmly challenged him, asking if he could swear on his honor that he was innocent. After a moment of hesitation, Vertel agreed. With his opponent cornered, Eugene formally demanded a trial by combat, staking both their honors upon the truth. Vertel could only grit his teeth in silent rage. News of the duel spread quickly through the castle staff, who gossiped about the second young master's alleged assassination plot. The target, they whispered, was the lord's newly hired knight, Sir Jan Eugene. In the courtyard, Vertel stood ready, his expression grim. Kamara watched with a heavy heart, announcing that since their claims conflicted, a duel would decide the truth in accordance with knight's code. Eugene held his sword, his gaze unwavering. Vertel charged forward with a furious roar, his attack a blur of motion. Eugene, however, remained perfectly calm, parrying the blow with casual ease. He deflected another strike, and then another, his disinterest palpable. A fleeting memory surfaced. Vertel, years ago, screaming that he had found the vampire. Eugene scoffed internally at the thought that this wretch had hunted him for a decade. Vertel was stunned by his opponent's overwhelming defense. Eugene continued to bat his attacks aside like they were nothing before a swift hit sent Vertel's sword flying from his grasp, clattering across the stone. Eugene coldly ordered him to pick it up. As Vertel struggled to his feet, everyone watching understood. The crowd, including Kamara, could see that Jan Eugene was overwhelmingly stronger than Vertel. With another effortless motion, Eugene struck, sending Vertel sprawling to the ground in a pool of his own blood. Kamara immediately stepped between them, declaring that it was enough. Eugene questioned the decision, but Kamara insisted the duel was over. He announced that since his brother could no longer fight, Sir Jan Eugene was the victor. From the ground, Vertel screamed that he could still fight. Kamara ordered him to stop, telling him that as a knight, he must now acknowledge his crimes and repent in prison. This sent Vertel into a rage, screaming his innocence and blaming Eugene for his downfall. If only Eugene had never appeared, he would not have suffered this humiliation. In a final, desperate lunge, his eyes glowing with power, he was stopped short by a blade of glowing blue energy. He froze, confused, wondering why his body wouldn't move. He looked down to see his brother's armor. Kamara's voice was cold, telling him he should have taken the chance he was given. In a flash, Eugene stood where Kamara had been, his sword at Vertel's neck. From the crowd, Felid and Partek watched the scene unfold in silence. Eugene walked away, leaving Kamara to deal with his foolish younger brother. Returning to Marin, Eugene strolled down a sunlit corridor. Miriam floated beside him, asking if it wasn't a pity to lose his very first familiar. After all, she pointed out, he had only used the man to force a confession before discarding him. Eugene disagreed, explaining that Maverick's mind was too weak to properly endure the transformation. Leaving him alive would have been like walking around with a sign that said free vampire samples here. Using him as bait was simply the most logical course of action. Besides, he added, he would never let someone who bared their fangs at him live. Miriam huffed, calling him heartless. She insisted a proper vampire needed countless slaves for style, but Eugene saw no need for them. Turning weaklings into familiars, he mused, was simply more trouble than it was worth. Perhaps if he found someone he actually liked. His thoughts were interrupted as he opened a door and overheard a frantic conversation. It had been 2 weeks since his departure, and the merchant Billmore was giving Preachella some chaotic news. Billmore greeted him with surprise and relief, but Eugene's focus was elsewhere. He grabbed the merchant, demanding to know what had happened to Sir Galfredic, as Preachella watched in silence. The merchant quickly explained that 2 weeks ago, Galfredic had entered a labyrinth in another domain. He had gone missing while exploring alone. Though the mid-rank areas had been searched, there was no sign of him. He was presumed lost in the high-rank monster area. Without a word, Eugene turned and left, riding out of the city at full speed. Upon arriving at the Evergrow estate, Eugene was greeted by a man on a balcony. The man, Jevin Evergrow, welcomed him, noting he was far more handsome than the rumor suggested. Eugene cut the pleasantries short, acknowledging the urgency of the situation. Jevin, the eldest son of the house, simply smiled and invited him inside to talk further. In his lavish office, Jevin claimed that Sir Galfredic's ambition had gotten the better of him. He explained that while a formal appointment was planned, Galfredic had recklessly entered the labyrinth's upper levels on his own initiative. Eugene confirmed the official story was that Galfredic acted alone. Jevin affirmed this, adding that his family had been unable to touch that area for over a century. It was, he explained, where the so-called master of the labyrinth resided. Another man in the room clarified that this being ruled the entire labyrinth. He smugly added that Galfredic's recklessness had caused trouble for many. Jevin introduced him as their territorial knight, Sir Lugates, who had accompanied Galfredic's party. Lugates remarked on the rumor that Eugene had defeated Galfredic in a duel. He then boasted that since he had also beaten Galfredic in a tournament, they were now united as members of the We Beat Up Galfredic Club. Eugene coldly asked if that was important right now. Jevin steered the conversation back, offering a formal apology and stating Galfredic was too valuable a talent to lose. He then mentioned hearing that Eugene and Galfredic were bound by a very deep friendship. Recalling the pink-haired knight's loud declarations, Eugene reluctantly agreed, internally cursing the man for spreading such rumors. Pledging his full support for a friend in need, Jevin detailed their grim policy. After a century of failed attempts to clear the upper levels, any party that went missing for a month was officially declared dead. With Galfredic already missing for 3 weeks, they had only 1 week left before all hope was lost and the search would be abandoned. Eugene stood, ready to leave at once. Jevin stopped him, insisting a subjugation party would be prepared within 3 days. He urged Eugene to rest until then. After thanking him, Eugene paused. Jevin added that a recently hired mage would be assigned as additional support, assuring him of her usefulness. Outside in the town square, Miriam flew about in a huff, complaining about Lugates' attitude and calling both him and Jevin liars. Eugene agreed, noting that several things didn't add up. He recalled Galfredic telling him his appointment was already secured, which made the subsequent labyrinth mission seem like a suspicious, last-minute test. He couldn't understand why they would suddenly change their minds. Furthermore, Galfredic was not the type to act on greed. He would have proceeded with caution and a competent team. His thoughts were interrupted by a preacher shouting that a messiah would come. The man spoke of a prophecy concerning a red shadow on the moon, claiming the calamity had already begun, evidenced by earthquakes and dying animals near the labyrinth. He even mentioned a skilled knight who had recently disappeared there, a clear reference to Galfredic. The preacher called for a ritual involving calves' blood to summon this messiah, unnerving the crowd. Miriam dismissed it as nonsense, but Eugene sensed the town's atmosphere was wrong. A cultist shoved a flyer into his hand as he passed. Looking at the paper, he connected the talk of earthquakes to a possible labyrinth collapse, but it still didn't explain Galfredic's actions. Deciding he couldn't wait, he told Miriam they were heading to the labyrinth immediately to scout ahead on their own. As they walked, a cloaked figure nearby remarked on the surprise of seeing a vampire. Eugene froze in shock. The figure, a young man, noted with a smirk that vampires were supposedly wiped out, yet here one was, walking brazenly in daylight. In an instant, Eugene's hand was around his throat, lifting her off the ground. He demanded to know who she was and how he knew, threatening to crush his neck. He choked out that he was a blood shadow. The name sounded familiar to Miriam. With a sudden cry of realization, she stopped Eugene, telling him he couldn't kill the mage. Eugene paused, confused. Miriam explained that the Blood Shadow School was a line of mages that had served vampires for generations. Overwhelmed by the revelation, the woman promptly fainted. After she was revived, she complained about being attacked without a word. Miriam retorted that she was the one who spoke like a villain first. The mage properly introduced herself as Sirenor Romari, explaining that her school's affinity allowed her to sense a vampire's presence. She then revealed Jevin had sent her to find him. Before continuing, she asked if it was true about his deep friendship with Galfredic, causing Eugene to silently vow to sew the man's mouth shut. Sirenor confessed she was part of the subjugation party when Galfredic disappeared. Eugene asked for the details. She explained she had joined to collect monster byproducts. While the labyrinth was considered mostly safe, a sudden, violent earthquake struck. The ground beneath her collapsed, but Galfredic grabbed her arm and saved her, falling into the chasm himself. Afterward, the rest of the party blamed Galfredic for causing the tremor by opening the door to the upper levels. Feeling indebted to him, she had sought out his close friend to tell him the truth. Her story confirmed Eugene's suspicion that Jevin's account didn't match. He wondered if Jevin had lied or if someone else had twisted the narrative. Sirenor then revealed something else she had seen. In the depths where Galfredic fell, there was an enormous eye drawn on the ground. Eugene was stunned. She asked if he remembered the flyers from the cultists in the plaza, confirming the symbol was the same one they worshipped. The cult's ritual involved a bloody sacrifice to welcome a messiah who, according to a hooded figure, would soon awaken. 3 days later, the subjugation party was fully assembled and provisioned. Lugates approached Eugene at the precipice of the labyrinth's entrance, mockingly asking if he was excited to see his close friend again. Eugene replied that he would prefer not to transport corpse. Lugates, assuming he was referring to Galfredic, laughed heartily at the apparent trust between them. Eugene, however, was thinking of Lugates. He had wanted to enter this labyrinth long ago, but now that he knew Galfredic's disappearance was no accident, he needed to watch Lugates closely. Still, he reasoned, if Galfredic had survived for 3 weeks, another 3 days wouldn't kill him. A group of robed men approached, introducing themselves as Templars from a local monastery. Their leader proclaimed it an honor to fight alongside a devout knight like Eugene, praising his selfless quest to save a friend. Miriam snickered at the irony of a Templar praising a vampire, but Eugene simply replied that they should all do their best. Lugates was surprised, noting that Templars rarely took interest in individual knights. He jokingly suggested Eugene could become a holy knight. The thought of a vampire holy knight was so absurd it rendered Eugene speechless, though Lugates missed the irony completely. At the entrance to the labyrinth, Eugene gave the order to wait and remain vigilant. Inside, Miriam marveled at the immense water energy emanating from crystalline structures. Partek explained that unlike a natural dungeon, the labyrinth was an artificial space designed for minimal survival. Eugene mused that if things went south, it might be a viable place to hide. Lugates appeared, remarking that it was a fitting place for evil things to lurk. After some time, he praised Eugene's exceptional skill, noting that not a single person had died on their way to the spot where Galfredik vanished. When Eugene pressed for their location, Lugates told him to be patient, reminding him of his trust in Galfredik's resilience. He then declared that he was the one they should trust now, as his house had fully mapped the labyrinth's traps. Eugene pointed out the contradiction. Despite their supposed knowledge, there were still casualties every time. With a sinister smile, Lugates spoke of making offerings to hope so that they might survive, his words sending a chill through Eugene. Suddenly, the ground began to shake violently. Lugates calmly announced that the labyrinth's layout was changing. This, he declared, was the spot. The very walls around them began to shift, revealing massive gears turning within the structure. This, he explained, was the shortcut to the upper levels. As the earthquake intensified, Eugene asked where the shortcut was. Lugates revealed it with a grin. It was right where they were standing. The floor gave way, plunging Eugene, Ramari, and Miriam into the darkness below. They landed in a vast, ruined chamber. Ramari, disoriented, asked where they were as Eugene realized the earthquake was no natural occurrence. Galfredik had been framed. Cyranor pointed toward the far end of the room, her voice trembling. There, bound to a stone throne, was the battered and bloodied form of Sir Galfredik. Eugene rushed to his side, landing before the throne. He checked for a pulse and found that, miraculously, Galfredik was still alive. Just as he prepared to treat him, Miriam shouted a warning. She had been feeling a strange presence deep below them. A sudden gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their light sources. From the chasm below, a crimson light began to glow, coalescing into a pair of massive, burning eyes. A colossal, demonic form emerged from the darkness, a hulking beast wreathed in violet flames. Ramari identified it as a minotaur, a powerful high-rank monster. As the beast charged, Eugene leaped into action, meeting its attack head-on. He parried a blow, his body absorbing the immense force of the impact. The creature roared in frustration, raising its weapon for another strike. It slammed its weapon down, but Eugene dodged, asking what the monster was aiming at. A glowing red orb of energy shot from his hand, striking the place where his companion stands. He ran to save Galfredik, forcing him to catch himself. To his shock, he saw a glowing pink magic circle beneath his feet. He yelled at Ramari, demanding to know what she was doing. She frantically explained it was a powerful monster that could kill even a vampire. She had cast a protective spell on Galfredik. A blade appeared at her neck. Eugene warned her that she had overstepped her boundaries. She apologized, but insisted she couldn't let him die recklessly. To save Galfredik, she argued, he needed to calm down and assess the situation. She was still in disbelief that a minotaur was even here, as a cyclops was considered the worst-case scenario. Suddenly, a wall of earth erupted from the wall. Lugates appeared, mocking him for barely surviving their last encounter. Ramari looked up in horror, realizing their betrayal was complete. Lugates taunted Ramari, revealing he knew she didn't truly want to save Galfredik. Enraged, Eugene lunged at him, accusing him of being the one responsible for Galfredik's condition. Lugates feigned innocence, claiming he only brought Eugene here to reunite him with his dear friend. Eugene grabbed him by the collar, but Lugates remarked that he was much ruder than the rumor suggested. A dark energy flared from Lugates, forcing Eugene to release him. He easily deflected Eugene's counterattack. Ramari was shocked at the brute strength he displayed. Lugates revealed a glowing magical formula on his hand, explaining that his power wasn't his own. Ramari identified it as a pattern for inheriting another's power. It was a forbidden spell, banned after it was used to steal the power of non-human beings. Lugates scoffed at the term forbidden, calling it a cowardly excuse made up by those who wished to monopolize power. He declared that he and his followers were the chosen ones, destined to survive when despair descends upon the world. Eugene understood. He realized Lugates had defeated Galfredik by borrowing another's strength, and then had the audacity to boast about it. A crimson aura enveloped Eugene as he promised to make Lugates understand his true place. He unleashed a wave of dark energy, which clashed violently with Lugates' purple aura. Ramari was stunned by the incredible power on display. Lugates grinned, admitting that Eugene was also hiding his true strength. He met Eugene's attack with his own, and a pulse of purple energy sent both Eugene and Ramari flying. Lugates gloated that every trap in the labyrinth had been figured out and bid Eugene a nice fall to his death. As they plummeted, Eugene screamed Romari's name, and she instinctively created a magic platform to catch them. Eugene immediately leaped toward Lugates, his eyes glowing with fury. Lugates calmly blocked the attack with a wall of rock, but the sword managed to cut the wall, the metal groaning under the pressure. He admitted that Eugene's strength was beyond what he had imagined, confessing that using Galfretic as bait was the right choice, as he couldn't have guaranteed victory in a head-on fight. With a manic grin, he announced that the final sacrifice would now be offered. Purple magic circles erupted around them, and Ramari cried out that she could no longer maintain her spells. She called out to Eugene as he walked away, leaving her to her fate. She lamented her decision to get involved, wishing she had just run away. She looked up in shock to see Eugene carrying Galfretic in his arms. He asked if she could save him. When she hesitated, admitting healing wasn't her specialty, he insisted that wasn't an answer to his question. With a sigh, she promised to do her best. Miriam returned, reporting that there was no exit. They were in a sealed boss room. She added that the immense water energy in the room was coming from a massive pool of blood that she couldn't control. The walls were lined with the same ice symbol from the cultist flyer. Eugene asked why she couldn't control the blood, and she explained it was because its owner was still alive. As she spoke, the blood began to churn, and a massive, bloody arm erupted from the pool. The Minotaur rose once more, while Ramari focused her healing magic on Galfretic. Eugene ordered Miriam to find a way out as he prepared to face the monster. He noted Galfretic was still unable to move, so he had to immobilize the beast first. He charged, his blade clashing against the Minotaur's hide. He then unleashed a flurry of blood-red tendrils, binding the monster's limbs. He dodged a counterattack and drove his sword into the beast's leg, only for the blade to shatter against its tough skin. The Minotaur charged a blast of energy in its mouth. Eugene dodged the attack, which left a deep gouge in the far wall. He was thrown back by the shockwave and landed hard. Leaping onto the monster's arm, he climbed onto its shoulder, noting that a normal sword couldn't even scratch it. He would have to make do. A blade of pure blood energy formed in his hand, and he plunged it into the monster's neck. He was thrown off but landed gracefully, though the wound he inflicted was too shallow. The Minotaur swatted him away like a fly, sending him crashing into the ground. As he struggled to his feet, he felt a strange beam of light strike the Minotaur, buying him a precious moment. Ramari, her hands glowing, urged Galfretic to wake up, telling him his friend was in danger. Eugene realized that Ramari had been telling the truth after all. He understood now that high-rank monsters were on a completely different level. The Minotaur's eyes glowed ominously as it began to absorb the pool of blood, regenerating its wounds. The blood surged toward it, and Eugene was caught in the torrent, helpless against the overwhelming force. Panting and bleeding, he was struck by a familiar feeling of powerlessness. He should have been used to it, but this time, it felt different. The pain was sharper, more agonizing than he remembered. As he fell, defeated, a single question echoed in his mind. He saw a faint image of Galfretic, his eyes opening. Why?